All right. Well, thank you certainly to USEA for the opportunity to participate today. I just want to echo what others have said about Barry, and also to say how gratified I am to see how well USEA is carrying on its important work and mission. So, Derek, if you could go to the next slide. For those who may not be familiar with the American Coal Council, we have been in service to the industry for 39 years, advancing the power, promise, and pride of America's coal industry. Our mission is threefold: to represent the collective interests of the industry from the hole in the ground to the plug in the wall, as we say, to provide education and professional development programs, market information, and advocacy support. We serve as a resource for industry, policymakers, and public interest groups. Our membership is comprised of about 130 companies from throughout the coal supply chain. So that's producers, consumers, transporters, traders, support services, and a category for our relationships with other coal and energy associations and academia that we call contributing supporters. And as others have recognized, I would like to recognize the essential nature of the coal supply chain. Our workers were deemed essential during the pandemic, and our workers also stepped up and responded. Next slide, please. As U.S. coal looks forward in 2021, we see good recovery from the pandemic-induced lower levels in 2020. Domestic consumption to rise by 13%, and our U.S. coal exports are anticipated to increase 23%. Now, those numbers come off of the USEA's latest short-term energy outlook in January. Coal continues as a key part of competitive energy and electricity markets in the US and globally. An inclusive policy is needed, policy that values the contributions of all energy resources. And technology and innovation for coal and emissions reduction requires support, development, and commercialization. And I'll be talking about each of these areas. So Derek, next slide, please. This slide has a USEA in January, and it's about coal power sector use. It's the market share by energy source. And as you see, coal share is projected to rise from 20% last year up to 24% in 2022. Natural gas's share is expected to decline during that period. And that's because of projected price increases, which EIA is currently forecasting at 41% in 2021 and about 9% in 2022. So during that time, coal's share rises and power sector consumption will grow 14% or about 60 million tons in 2021. Coal plant retirements are lower than in recent years, currently projected at about 2.7 gigawatts, again by EIA. Next slide, please. On our grid, more variable renewables and fewer conventional resources mean increasing concerns about reliability and threats to reliability. And I would point to California in August of 2021 as the latest indication of that. During the heat wave, California experienced electricity supply falling short of demand, and so they had rolling blackouts and emergency conservation measures had to be instituted. In December, NERC came out with their long-term reliability assessment, and I have a quote here from that. Operators must increasingly balance uncertain loads with uncertain generation. And some of the cautions in that NERC report included that the Western interconnection may face periods of resource inadequacy and load loss, and that relying on neighboring states or areas for imported power is an emerging risk, which is how NERC characterized it. The northwestern US and Rocky Mountain areas also show potential for load loss, and Texas faces increasing risk, tight operating reserves. MISO's reserve margins are falling. And NERC also talked about the vulnerabilities of natural gas in the assessment, the risk of insufficient infrastructure, disruption to delivery or to alternate fuel delivery. This is especially the case in New England, California, and the desert Southwest. So this brings us to the importance of coal in our generating mix and the attributes of coal, because not only is it dispatchable 24/7 to meet electricity needs, it is fuel secure. Inventory is stored on site at the power plants. Next slide, please. Globally, coal's important role continues. This slide has a graphic from the BP Statistical Review of World Energy, and it's for 2019 data. But you can see that coal continued to account for the largest share of electricity generation. It was 36%, natural gas was 23%, and renewables were 10%. Coal also continued as the second largest share of overall primary energy in 2019. Coal production grew globally in 2019 by about 1.5%, with significant increases in China and Indonesia. Next slide, please. This slide has data compiled by the World Coal Association on capacity additions. Since 2010, 40 countries not previously using coal for power production have added it to their generation portfolios. In 2020, 17 new coal units totaling over 12 gigawatts were completed in China, India, Bangladesh, Germany, the Czech Republic, and the Dominican Republic. In 2021, 60 coal units under construction are scheduled to start up with capacity of 35.5 gigawatts, and that includes 15 plants in China. Next slide, please. Some global 25 gigawatts, or about 20% capacity of 1,100 gigawatts, 1,000 gigawatts, and growing. And or under construction, the coal plant is only 12. These are going to be running not for months or years, but for decades. With regard to CO2 energy emissions, this is 2019 data. Total global energy-related CO2 emissions were about 33 billion tons, according to IEA. And they break that down into advanced economies and the rest of the world. So advanced economies, around 11 billion tons, and for the rest of the world, around 22 billion tons. In the US, for total energy-related CO2 emissions, it's about 5.1 billion tons. And of that, less than 1 billion is associated with US coal power plants. So US coal power plants are only 19% of the US total energy-related CO2 emissions, and they are less than 3% of global. Next slide, please. I want to talk about carbon capture. I know it's been referenced a lot today. The coal sector has had engagement on carbon capture for a long, long time. I am a member of the National Coal Council, which is a policy advisory group to the US Secretary of Energy. And I was appointed by the Secretary in 2014. But for many, many years before that, the NCC had been doing over 20 years since the year 2000 have been done. And the conclusions support carbon capture, storage, and utilization technologies as the most impactful opportunity for CO2 emissions reductions. NCC's consistent recommendations to DOE include pursuing R&D simultaneously on numerous technologies to develop a portfolio of applications, identifying and characterizing CO2 storage options and refining storage monitoring and verification methods, employing DOE and industry partnerships to demonstrate technologies on a large-scale basis, aiming to reduce cost and expedite commercialization, supporting financial incentives and federal funding, especially for early mover and first-of-a-kind projects, and developing international partnerships to advance technology solutions and global adoption. Next slide, please. More recent developments relating to carbon capture include, of course, President Biden, who included it in his campaign platform, and then Congress with the Energy Act of 2020, passed at the end of the year as part of the omnibus spending bill. Robust funding for CCUS research and development, large-scale pilot projects, commercialization, commercial demonstration projects, and transformation technologies are included. Reforms to carbon dioxide pipeline permitting are included, and a 2-year extension of the deadline to commence construction on carbon capture projects under the Section 45Q tax credit program are included. More recently, as in last week, Elon Musk tweeted that he is donating $100 million towards a prize for the best carbon capture technology. So we say, bring it on, Elon. Next slide, please. I want to end with this slide on America's coal and energy policy imperatives. And the first one is reasonable energy policy. And by that, I mean sound, inclusive energy policy, because that's what works for Americans. Sweeping, costly climate policies do not. And polling has shown that more than half of Americans would not pay more to support aggressive climate plans. We must preserve coal plants in the power sector mix. That fuel diversity is important to competitive energy markets, and coal contributes directly to affordable, reliable, and stable electricity supply and prices. We must retain good coal supply chain jobs. These jobs are critically important to communities where coal is mined, transported, and used in power plants, steelmaking facilities, and other industrial applications. These jobs make the difference between thriving local and regional economies and those plagued by unemployment. We must reflect global energy needs in U.S. policies. Recognize that coal is a foundational element to electrify economies and improve quality of life around the world. And finally, we must lead on energy and emissions technology. We would advance coal power plant technology, such as the DOE's Coal First initiative. Of course, it includes CCS and CCUS, and then applications for the carbon in coal to be harnessed to use in products like carbon fiber, carbon foam, graphene, and graphite. So bear in mind that the US has more coal reserves than any country in the world. So let's use that abundance to advance energy security, affordability, and reliability for Americans, and also to leverage it globally, to global objectives and the future of coal and energy globally. Again, thank you for the opportunity to participate, and if we have time for questions, I'm happy to address.